Why are politicians suddenly fighting for gig workers? The answer could put more money in your pocket. Here's what they're not telling you. While governments promise sweeping tax relief for everyday working citizens, a silent financial trap buried deep within Schedule C drains thousands from your bank account. For millions of independent contractors, the dream of flexible gig work is quickly turning into an inescapable nightmare of high self-employment. Taxes and empty savings. Every delivery completed and every freelance project finalized triggers a hidden liability that the modern working class is simply not prepared to pay during tax season. Inside the halls of Congress, powerful politicians are suddenly realizing that these angry, overtaxed independent voters now hold the key to winning the next election cycle. A massive legislative war is quietly brewing over a proposed 50% tax write-off, designed specifically to capture the loyal support of independent swing voters. What started as simple bureaucratic paperwork has now transformed into a potent political weapon, shaking the very foundations of the traditional two-party tax debates. Ride-hailing drivers, freelance designers, and delivery couriers are uniting online, creating a powerful bloc of voters demanding immediate and permanent relief from unfair taxation systems. The current system forces self-employed individuals to pay double the Medicare and Social Security contributions, a heavy burden that traditional employers never have to face. As tax day approaches, the digital landscape is flooded with videos of angry workers showing their shocking financial liabilities, sparking a national conversation on economic fairness. This is not just a story about numbers on a government form. It is a battle for the economic survival of America's fastest-growing workforce sector. In Washington, lawmakers are scrambling new bills, desperate to show that they are championing the rights of hard-working, self-employed individuals across the nation. Opponents argue that offering such massive tax cuts will create a devastating deficit, threatening the long-term stability of critical national social safety net programs. Yet, the pressure from the streets continues to mount, as grassroots movements organise physical protests outside local tax offices and major governmental administrative buildings. Politicians who once ignored the gig economy are now forced to listen, recognising that 70 million independent workers represent a massive, untapped voting demographic. Behind closed doors, corporate lobbyists are fighting hard to protect traditional business models, fearing that tax reform will shift more financial responsibilities back onto them. The proposed 50% deduction would allow qualifying freelancers to keep thousands of dollars in their pockets, immediately boosting their purchasing power and local economies. For a young freelance web developer, this reform represents the difference between expanding her small business or shutting down her operations due to overwhelming debt. As legislative sessions drag late into the night, negotiators argue over which specific gig worker categories should qualify for these highly anticipated tax breaks. The tension is palpable on the Capitol steps, where advocates gather daily to demand that congressmen vote in favor of the historic self-employment tax cuts. Mainstream media networks are finally picking up the story, broadcasting primetime segments that analyse how the gig tax revolt could reshape the upcoming election map. Economists are divided on the long-term impact, with some predicting rapid economic growth and others warning of high inflation and reduced government revenue streams. In rural communities, where gig work is often the only available source of income, the tax reform debate carries a uniquely personal and urgent significance. A delivery driver stops to check his account balance, realizing that half of his hard-earned daily profits are already designated for federal self-employment taxes. This financial reality is fueling a quiet desperation that political strategists from both major parties are eager to exploit for their own electoral advantages. By targeting independent voters with specific tax relief promises, political campaigns hope to break traditional voting patterns in crucial swing states across the country. The legislative draft under discussion promises a radical simplification of the dreaded Schedule C, removing confusing calculations that often lead to costly filing errors. Accountants are experiencing unprecedented demand as worried clients seek advice on how to navigate the complex, rapidly shifting landscape of modern self-employment tax codes. A veteran accountant points to a computer screen, explaining how the current tax laws disproportionately penalise sole proprietors compared to large, incorporated businesses. This glaring disparity has become a central talking point for Labour advocates, who argue that the tax code is fundamentally rigged against small individual creators. As public anger intensifies, several prominent senators break ranks with their party leadership, declaring their absolute support for the historic tax write-off bill. Their sudden defiance highlights the growing influence of the gig economy lobby, which is rapidly becoming one of the most powerful forces in Washington today. With elections looming just months away, every public statement made by congressional leaders is carefully calibrated to appeal to frustrated, overtaxed independent contract workers. Under the proposed law, the 50% write-off would act as an immediate credit, directly offsetting the heavy double taxation penalty currently paid by freelancers. For a single mother working as a virtual assistant, this change means she can finally afford quality healthcare for her children without going into debt. But corporate tech platforms are lobbying quietly against the bill, worried that clear tax definitions might force them to reclassify independent contractors as full employees. This hidden battle between gig platforms and labour advocates remains one of the most intense, highly funded conflicts currently taking place in congressional offices. Meanwhile, independent workers are not waiting for Washington to act, using social media platforms to organise local mutual aid funds and tax education workshops. Their self-reliance is inspiring, but it also highlights the complete failure of the state to provide basic economic security for its most vulnerable modern workers. In a packed town hall meeting, a local business owner shares his struggles, drawing emotional nods of agreement from a crowd of diverse gig workers. The political stakes continue to rise, as recent poll numbers indicate that independent voters are increasingly prioritising tax reform over all other national policy issues. This shift in voter priorities is forcing presidential candidates to adjust their platforms, offering bolder promises of financial relief to the growing self-employed class. In a television studio, political analysts debate whether the proposed tax cuts are a genuine reform effort or merely a cynical ploy to buy votes. The truth likely lies somewhere in between, as policy and political survival are deeply intertwined in the chaotic environment of a modern national legislative campaign. For the gig workers watching the broadcast, the political games matter far less than the actual dollars they stand to save if the bill passes. In the Capitol, the Legislative Committee meets behind closed doors, working tirelessly to hammer out the final details of the tax reform compromise agreement. Journalists gather in the hallway outside, waiting anxiously for any news or leaks regarding the progress of the highly sensitive, closed-door negotiations taking place. A senior senator emerges to address the press, his expression serious as he warns that critical differences still remain between the two negotiating political parties. The news of a potential deadlock sends waves of anxiety through the online gig communities, sparking a fresh wave of digital advocacy and phone campaigns. With ding hours, congressional phone lines are completely jammed as thousands of angry freelancers call their representatives to demand immediate action on the tax bill. This rapid, coordinated response demonstrates the incredible organising power of the modern gig workforce, connected through digital networks and shared economic struggles. Recognising the danger of ignoring this block, legislative leaders rush back to the negotiating table, desperate to find a workable compromise before tax season begins. The revised bill includes a special provision targeting low-income freelancers, ensuring they receive the maximum possible benefit from the proposed 50% tax write-off. A graphic designer working from a shared creative studio smiles as she calculates her potential savings under the newly proposed legislative tax compromise framework. These tangible savings could revitalise local creative communities, allowing independent artists to invest in better equipment and expand their reach into new global markets. On the Senate floor, the final debate begins with impassioned speeches from both sides of the aisle, framing the vote as a historic economic turning point. Supporters call it a long overdue act of justice for the modern self-employed class, while critics warn of unforeseen consequences for the national fiscal budget. The gallery is packed with independent workers who have travelled from all over the country to witness this crucial moment in their long-running struggle. The electronic voting board begins to light up with red and green indicators, reflecting the tense, deeply divided nature of the modern political landscape. As the final votes are tallied, A tense silence falls over the chamber, everyone waiting to see if the historic tax reform will finally pass. With a slim majority, the bill is officially approved, triggering quiet celebrations among the advocates watching from the gallery and online across the nation. The passage of this legislation represents a massive victory for the self-employed class, proving that organised independent workers can successfully challenge entrenched political interests. However, the battle is far from over, as the focus now shifts to how the Internal Revenue Service will write the specific rules for implementation. Tax experts warn that complex administrative guidelines could still limit the effectiveness of the law, potentially excluding many deserving gig workers from the benefits. To prevent this, grassroots organisations are already pivoting their focus, preparing to monitor the regulatory drafting process and educate workers on their new rights. Back in her home office, a freelance writer reviews the newly released guidelines, feeling a cautious sense of hope for her financial future this year. The successful tax rebellion has sent a clear message to politicians of all parties. The gig workforce is no longer a silent, easily ignored demographic. As political parties prepare for the next election cycle, they must now treat self-employed workers as a primary constituency with unique and urgent economic demands. This shift in power could lead to further legislative reforms, including better access to portable benefits and stronger legal protections for independent contractors everywhere. For now, the 50% write-off stands as a historic milestone, a tangible result of collective action in an era of deep economic uncertainty. The lessons of this tax revolt will undoubtedly shape future labour movements, showing that digital organising can translate directly into powerful legislative victories in Washington. As the sun sets over the United States Capitol, a new era of economic advocacy begins, driven by the unstoppable rise of the independent gig worker. Ultimately, this rebellion proves that when the modern working class unites, they can rewrite the rules of the economic game to benefit the many.